Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Hank Ortega. Hank, first of all, welcome and thank you for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thank you very much, Tom. We appreciate being here today.
Hank, could you start with your professional background and what brought you to the Hill Country?
Brought me to the hill country. That was a long trail. I've had relatives or ancestors here since 1831. That's a completely different subject.
That
Earliest
would be
ans
before the Republic of Texas was
That's
formed.
absolutely right. Excuse me, I said 1831. Meant to say 1731. 1731, 15 groups of people came over by order of the King of Spain and to bring commerce. In other words, he wanted more beef and grains and sheep and furs and skins and just everything else. Plus, he wanted the area settled a little better than just a few regional settlers and soldiers. So he sent these 17 families, and one of them was Juan Curbelo, and he was my first ancestor here in the Americas, and that's 1731. They sailed from Canary Islands, went to Cuba, and then landed in what we now call Mexico and started hiking immediately, started hiking north. That was all New Spain, and New Spain went all the way up to southern Utah at the time. And then they got here and immediately set up shop. I had ancestors in the Texas Rebellion in 1835. They fought, three of them fought in the Battle of Concepcion and the siege and Battle of Behar, which was when the Texians and Tejanos, we separate the two groups, those of us that follow that and do genealogy, ran the Mexican army out of San Antonio and took over, essentially. Some of them moved into Travis and Bowie moved into the Alamo, and all of that went as it did.
I went to an elementary school named for Ben Milam.
Oh, yeah, the Milo High School. Yep. And they were there during the Battle of Behar when Milo was killed. So they carried that information and history with them back when they went back to, I'm trying to think of the name of the little village. It's a Spada mission, and there was the village next to it that escapes me right now. At any rate, so there was plenty of roots. The Casillas family is descended out of that group, and from as early as 1828 or something like that, the Casillas family joined into that line, and that's the line I follow. There's lots of them in San Antonio, including a candidate for sheriff I just discovered recently. And if some names common as Smith, you may or may not be related, but if your name is Casillas or you have Casillas in your line, you're related in some way, shape, or form. Beyond that, to move on, I moved around professionally. It was not intuitive that I become a person involved in radio. And true to amateur radio, we come from all walks of life. My background was primarily medical. I was a combat medic at 18 and in a recon team in Vietnam. I was a mountain rescue paramedic in the Sierra Nevada for a number of years, and then became a emergency medicine physician assistant, and did that for 25 years, and primarily focused on rural communities, small towns, mainly because there you have to do everything. If something comes in, you gotta be able to take care of it and before you ship them off, and so, yeah, you see everything. Deliver babies, major trauma from oil fields and car wrecks and stuff like that, and you have to deal with it, and communities they really are underserved and have been traditionally for many years, all along, for that matter. So you wouldn't think that I would end up there in amateur radio, but it was definitely an interest. When I was a little boy, my dad was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in 1956 to go into the X-15 project. And right across the street, it was a young man at ham radios, and he had a virtual antenna farm. He had 7 or 8 antennas sticking up out of this government house that he was renting, and I was always fascinated by that, and back then, when electronics were not very exclusive, you could hear him on the television, when he was broadcasting in a certain manner. My dad went over there and got some ferrite beads is what they're called, and they act as filters or they exclude the signal that you don't want, and he put them on his stereo. I didn't have stereo then, it was hi-fi. He put them on his hi-fi speaker wires and the TV power line and stuff like that, and that stopped all of that right away. So I didn't get to hear the guy talking to Japan and China and, all these other countries, but it always stayed in the back of my mind. So, at any rate, we retired from Texas up in, Stockton area and then moved back to Oregon, which is where I spent most of my time, and we found that we were still leaving there in the winter and coming down here and staying up there in the summer. So we bought a house down here about 15 years ago and started doing in the opposite direction. We'd stay here all winter and then go up there in the summer. COVID came along, that stopped that, and that was when I decided I need to get involved in radio just because I've always been interested in it and never did anything with it. The amateur radio club that's here in the community, Hill Country Amateur Radio Club, also HCARC, has a very active club. They offer training and they offer education and they'll help new people pick out the kind of radios they need and explain how they apply to everyday life or to emergency situations or for prepping, because that's a new, not necessarily very new, but it's certainly a new renewed interest in prepping and radios are a very large part of that radio communication. And this particular club co cooperates with other organizations who are deeply involved with the Red Cross. They're the ones who dispatch emergency communications to disasters such as tornadoes, the explosion down in Texas City and West, the hurricanes, Katrina, things like that. And then we're also involved with the local sheriff's department through their Office of Emergency Management. And we provide emergency communications for them should that be needed. Now, that's a question of need. Most law enforcement and first responders, fire departments, emergency and rescue, they all have certain bandwidth within the cell system that allows them to not get inundated with extra people, which is going to be the issue on April 8th. They don't get crowded out. That's not too big an issue. But when you're a rural fire department and you don't have a cohesive radio system, then that needs to come into play if they can't get out on their cell phones to be dispatched or to command and control their operations, then they're in a bind. Can't move. And they also cannot notify anybody that their roads are blocked with extra population that has suddenly descended on us. And other emergencies that are conceivable, we provide ham radio operator with a radio, sometimes with a amplifier. They have in most of the volunteer fire departments in the county a antenna that either we provided or they purchased. The sheriff's department purchased theirs. The fire departments, we provided them and we installed them, put them in their building, run the antenna cable down into the building itself so that we can operate from the inside in an emergency. That's pretty much taken care of. We've still got a few departments that we need to get that taken care of. Those that don't have antennas, we have a couple of guys who have mobile antennas that we can just come out. Either they're already attached to the automobile or they pull them on a trailer with an old crank up that goes to, I think either Pipe Creek or Upper Turtle Creek. I can't remember which, but they have access to an antenna there. That means they have to operate in the cold or the heat and run their engine and stuff like that. They don't have a modulated atmosphere, so to speak, to operate in. Still can be done. It still can be done very well. We also interface with other groups, so we can talk to satellites and talk to around the world, and we can talk to the International Space Station. Now, I'll talk briefly about the radio station that we have here. Our club call sign is W3XO. And W3XO was once the call sign of Bill Tynan. He was a pioneer in radio, amateur radio, and explored a lot of developments. And he has a memorial plaque on the back of the radio. It's in the space station. It has his name and his call sign on it. And he's recognized as a pioneer, and that's flying around in space every day. And that's the one that the amateur licensed astronauts use in order to talk to Earth stations such as high school and elementary schools and other private clubs and or private individuals can also signal to them. Generally, the daytime hours as they pass over somebody during the daytime, that's reserved for the schools. And if it's you're up at the middle of the night and no schools are operating in the middle of the night and they're going overhead, you can signal them then and they should be able to answer. It's not the middle of the night to them because they go around the planet every hour or so, 45 minutes or so.
So you've used a couple of terms. I wanna make sure I get those right for our listeners. Ham radio and amateur radio operator. Are those the same? Are they different? How do you guys, distinguish those?
Those are the same. Ham was I was asked about this recently. Ham was applied to radio operators back when everybody was using wired communications. That is, you'd have a telegrapher at a office or a train station, and he was talking to somebody else. That had to have a wire run all that distance, so they would follow the train tracks. The wire would reach to the other station, and he would talk to that guy, tell him the train left or the train's overdue, etcetera. That all had to be wired, and they, used all Morse code, and so the Morse code developed by F.B. Morse is recognized internationally. Everybody uses it, like, for example, in aircraft, when people fly commercially or private worldwide, the spoken language is English. You use English as a basic language no matter who you are or where you're from. So Morse code was used worldwide, but especially in the States where it was really developed. And people that were a little better at it were pretty slick, but the guys that were what were they described as ham-fisted, where you're just banging on that thing and not producing very clear signal or clumsy signal, they referred to them as ham-fisted, and that became shortened to ham. That's a sort of a nickname, but everybody uses it, and it is no longer a derisive term, it's just a general term. Amateur radio is the proper name in the United States. It means that we're not paid for, commercial transmission of, data or information or voice over the air, and we're restricted to certain areas, and we don't take pay or advertise commercially on the radio within certain restrictions to that too. And you have to have a license. And internationally, every country, just about except North Korea, has a licensure program that allows people to operate in their country, citizens in their country, to operate within certain band limits and under certain rules. Generally, licenses from the United States are accepted in other countries. There's also some restrictions as to whether you can operate in the air if you're in a commercial airplane. They really prefer you don't. In fact, I think there's law against that, but you tell them you have the radio and it's in your bag if you're putting it in your carry-on. They're more concerned about the lithium battery that's in the radio than they are in anything else, but you just don't transmit. And when you are on a cruise line, generally, unless it's actually a ham-operated program that you're going on, like people have Disney cruises or people have cruises with themes, they might have a radio cruise. They pretty much assume everybody's gonna be transmitting at one time or another on different bands, but you pretty much have to ask the captain yourself, "When we're near shore, can I transmit and talk to people on shore?" And he'll say either say yes or no, and as on the ship, that his word is law. And there are also restrictions as to when you can transmit and what bands you can transmit according to how you're licensed. And the United States, we have a three-tiered license structure. The technician has the most limitations on where they can communicate, and then general, which is the ranking I have, and then extra, which is pretty much unlimited across the amateur bands, and that includes everything, including uh, Morse code signaling, and which is called CW or voice transmission. You can do single sideband, excuse me, and you can do electronic transfer of data such as RIDI and AIT. Those are all automated and translated by your computer into short signals that go off very quickly, and you can get lots and lots of context that way, but it's not very personal. I prefer voice, and just because I like to talk to whoever's at the other end.
You mentioned use or availing yourself to emergency services during natural disasters. So I'm gonna pick Ike, and then the snowpocalypse of 2021, but you also mentioned man-made catastrophes, and you specifically mentioned Texas City and West. So could you maybe describe how a club would help out emergency services both in a natural disaster and then a true catastrophic event such as Texas City or West?
A natural disaster or man-made explosion or something like that, there's 2 tiers of response. Number 1, the people who are in the immediate area become aware that something's going on. For instance, the last time we had a good hailstorm here, guys pretty much picked up the radios and started turning on and saying, "Hey, anybody out there, you guys catching the size of this hail?" And my hail's about an inch and a half, and we actually measure them and are part of the Skywarn program. And if they activate the net, then it becomes official. Now, we can activate the net locally where we're all Skywarn people and we're saying, okay, the hail in this neighborhood is this size and it's coming down for this length of time, and there's this kind of damage. You make the report according to what's on this card that we use. The other level is the actual dispatch of communicators, emergency communicators, to the scene of a large disaster or situation. That goes to the Red Cross. The local officials activate the incident command system. And one of the groups that gets notified is Red Cross, and they are the ones that tell they need emergency communications down there. We have a couple of people who interface with Red Cross a whole lot. They have trailer, they have all their stuff in a go bag, they have radios that are already in a box that can operate from the box. They have very little that they have to do to set up. It has a battery, they have a way of recharging that battery, and then they go, and they're told to report to a certain area. They have identification that's provided by what are called ARES or RACES, and ARES is the emergency response system that's formalized within the Association of Amateur Radio Operators called ARL, which is American Radio Relay League, named from back when that was the primary use for amateur radio, was to pass the word from one guy to the next. And that's essentially how they get there. So if they would have gone to Texas City, they would have been instructed by the Red Cross, "Hey, we need 5 guys. How many can you supply?" We can supply 2 with a trailer and this, and they probably already have a card down there that says, "Oh, yeah, that's this guy, and he has this and this equipment. We need to send you down. Can you get away? Can you go?" And if you say no, then of course, but if you say yes, then you're on your way. And they have certain it's all formalized, so they have a way of reimbursing fuel. They have a way of getting you down there. They have a way of feeding you and sheltering you. And in the case of our little trailer, you can actually stay inside there. It's got a generator. It's got everything they need to operate for extended period of time. And then they're staged to a certain site and they're expected. So it's all very formalized and very carefully done and very rapidly done. But that other level about people who are in the immediate area, you start reporting right away. Good example of that was in 1932, there was a major flood here in Kerrville, and it wiped out all the roads and much of the center of the river area where it is today. There was even a couple of guys trapped in a tree by the dam. I think he was a 13-year-old boy by where the dam is now. Gene Butt was the grandson of the founder of HEB, was a ham operator, and he got on the radio, and for 3 days, he and 2 other guys rotated shifts and communicated with the world pretty much, but they immediately notified San Antonio because San Antonio had no idea anything like that had happened. Remember, in 1932, the road between here and San Antonio was probably mostly dirt. Might have been paved to some extent, but it was Model Ts, and it's not instant, and they probably did not have a long distance communication in the way of telephone lines down there that was reliable. It was wiped out anyway because if it followed the roads were wiped out, and so were those lines. So for 3 days, he was communicating with people's families, he was communicating with emergency service and rounding up people to get up here. Little known history about our area, but as a result of that, the ARRL said we need to formalize emergency response communications, and so twice a year now, in the summer and the winter, we do what's called Winter Field Day and Summer Field Day, in which we operate our station and hams all over the United States operate their home stations or mobile and make attempts at emergency contacts, as many as you can, in a 24-hour period. So we ran a 24-hour station at our station down at River Arts Park and succeeded very well in all modes. We did electronic modes and we did voice modes and we did CW, which is Morse code, as I said. We had visitors come through there to observe our operations. And it's a practice for emergency situations such as natural or man-made disaster.
What about the situation we had with Ike, which it was hurricane comes ashore in near Corpus, goes up past around San Antonio, turns east, we start getting rain, 50 inches of rain. We know where it's headed because we know which way the rivers go. It comes to Houston. It doesn't breach the dams on the west side of Houston, but they have to open the dams. So my neighborhood, for instance, was wiped out because we lived about a mile and a half from the bayou. So you have a moving storm. You pretty much know where it's going. Are you guys behind or in the middle? Are you ahead? All of the above or something different?
But certainly all of the above, because if you're in place, you're already on the air and reporting. And unfortunately, sometimes that report is looks like my antenna is going down. And this is my last communication. I'm going to be moving to give a site that you think you're going to be moving to, and hopefully we hear from that guy again. It could be that severe. It could be just I'm on the edge of it. I'm only getting an inch or 2 of rain in the last 8 hours, so it doesn't seem to be too bad here. That helps whoever's listening and whoever's passing that on. If that is, if there's a formal net hearing this guy, they can delineate what the edges of the storm are. But if you're right in the middle of a disaster, in addition to trying to make communication, you've also got to survive. And so sometimes that involves getting up and moving out. Generally, all of us have some kind of radio in the car already installed in your pickup or whatever, and you can still communicate as you leave. Some of them are HF, which allows you distance, and some of them are 2 meter, which just allows you local communication, or if you can hit the repeater. If the repeater goes out, it's struck by lightning or it's burned up in a fire or any kind of damage, that kind of shuts down the local communication a little bit. But other people will pick up and start saying, I can relay from here, I hear you, and I can relay from there. That's one of the practices we do. We go on the 2 meter net and we set up all of the fire departments about 3 times a year. We set up all the fire departments with the radio, and we communicate with them through the repeater, then we shut off the repeater and go to simplex, where we just do direct line of sight. Some guys can hear us because we got a very powerful station here, but some guys can't, and so somebody will say, I know where I am in relation to that guy, and I can hear him, and I can hear you, I can relay." So we write all that down. We know who we can count on for communications in those situations. Fire is a good example because that spreads fast and it's in an area, but doesn't affect another area. And around here, it'd be brush fires.
Let me turn to the upcoming eclipse
Oh, great.
and ask you, what will the club's role be in that? How are you interfacing or working with emergency services? And I have to ask, do you think we're ready?
The As I mentioned before, our primary role, if asked, and we're in a dependent situation. We don't go out unless they ask us to go out. So that'd be through the sheriff's department and say, we're pretty much assuming that there are coming this many people coming. So when we had the October, we had blessing of having a previous
Right.
event. When we had the October 13th event, not as many people showed up as we expected, not as many people affected, even though there was more people. It wasn't even as bad as sometimes the bike race where it shuts down a couple of streets and you can't get through, you got to go around. It wasn't even that bad. There were a lot of people here, but mostly it was a good thing for us, and it was a good thing for all the people that were here to enjoy it. But we were ready. We just weren't asked to go. Essentially, what we'll do is set up a ham operator and maybe a relief at each rural fire department so that they have cohesive communication. We'll establish the net. That is, everybody makes contact. We're sure everybody can talk to each other, and we'll stay on the repeater so that we're sure everybody can hear us and we're sure they can hit the repeater and we can hear them. And essentially, we just stand by. If there's a crash in the cell phone system because it's overloaded, that's where we come into play. If there's a dispatch that needed for a rural fire department in one area or another, or we have to mobilize other rural fire departments to go there to assistance. But it's only if the cell phone communications doesn't work. And that's what most people rely on is their cell phones. By the way, brings up to thought that almost everybody nowadays, including small kids, are radio operators because your cell phone is a radio and you're licensed to use it by the fee that you pay every month, the exorbitant fee that you pay every month. So that's a radio. So you're already a radio operator. And uh, we've had ham licenses, amateur radio licenses issued to people as young as 10 years old. So it's not impossible. It's not that difficult. You just have to be able to take a test and understand the information.
We have talked to a lot of people about the upcoming eclipse, and we've both been to lots of presentations. And I hear variations from, we have no idea what's about to hit us, to we're as prepared as we think we can be, to everything in the middle. Any thoughts from the communications perspective on preparation of our community?
I think that for some organizations, such as police, fire, emergency medicine, emergency rescue, it's just another Tuesday. They operate on radio equipment under duress every single day. There's important and stressful things stressing the system every single day. Same thing in the emergency room. You could go all day and have maybe 3 people come in there, and then the next hour, you've got 15 people all coming there at the same time that you've got to sort through. Those people are practiced, and that's the key. The people who are not practiced is the everyday citizen. They don't give this any thought, or if they gave it some thought, they just don't know what to do or where to start and where to go. Generally, the safest response, of course, is just stay where you are, stay home, don't move about. If you move about, you add to the traffic, that adds to the problems, that adds to the headaches that the other services have to deal with, and it's just too big a mess, and you become a statistic. You're one of the victims. You're one of the people that was stuck for hours on I-10, etcetera. Now, as far as preparation, I think the community services are doing everything they can within their knowledge base. Some of the people in community services have been elsewhere and experienced these things. I mentioned that I was in combat at a young age, so I've seen some really ugly, stressful situations and how people on both sides deal with it and how the people in the middle deal with it. And the entire time that I was in practice of medicine, both as a rescue paramedic and as a physician assistant staffing a small emergency room, you had to deal with everything and you just revert to training and you'll get through it. And that's a question of experience. How many times have you practiced this? The more you experience it, the easier it is to accomplish the task. So that's where preparedness comes in. People who have been, I think, misidentified as quote preppers as being some kind of a Rambo survivalist, individualist, lone wolf kind of woods animal. It's a mistake. We're just everyday people that saw to getting a first aid class, saw to knowing how to store food and how to cook in the outdoors. Every guy that barbecues a side of beef, he knows what he's doing. So he's going to be fine. He's going to be able to feed himself and his neighbors, things like that. It's the small skills that you learn over a lifetime that make you prepared. We may find two things. One, we may find out that there are enough people to stress the mechanical system, that is, cell phones go down, lights, backup traffic, things like that. But the human factor, we've got a lot of experienced people in the community who deal with it every day. They know how to get that out there. They, for instance, the police department knows how to interface with the road department to get the barriers and barricades and cones and all that out efficiently. It'll happen. It'll happen. I think we've got a very good chances of surviving the eclipse. Uh,
Let's turn to the club, the Kerrville club here in Kerrville. If someone wanted more information, they wanted to maybe talk to somebody about membership or maybe just get involved a little bit, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Very easy. First of all, everything you need to know and learn about the club is found at Hill Country ARC. That's Hill Country Alpha Romeo Charlie .org, O-R-G, hillcountryarc.org. That has everything about the club, that has membership application, that has all the data about what our radios are, what our club system looks like, and how we operate. And when we meet on the first Thursday of the month at 6:30, we open the doors at the old Union Church, which is down there where Water Street comes into the highway, big white old church. And we open the doors at 6:30. We have a lot of equipment out that people can look at and talk about and visit with the crew. And if you come down there and find me and say you're a visitor, and I'll probably recognize you're a visitor and come over and talk to you, I'll introduce you to the officers of the club. And you can sit through a meeting. We do program first, then we have our business meeting at the end of the evening, generally hour and a half, and we're done. We have a number of activities that the public are invited to. We do winter and field day, as I've already mentioned. You're welcome to come to the club shack and observe the radio operation. And if you're bold, we'll sit you down at a radio and get you on the air. We also do JOTA, which is Jamboree on the Air. We support the scouting movement by getting them on the air, and they talk to other scouts all over the United States and internationally as well. And then we also do POTA, which is Parks on the Air. We go to state parks and activate radios and make long distance communications, high frequency communications from the park. And that's all has to be done under field conditions, battery and radio.
Well, Hank, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. You just told us how to find out more about the club, but I'm going to ask you now formally, if someone wanted more information on the topics you've touched on today, what would be the best place for them to go?
Either come to the meeting on the first Thursday at 6:30 at the Old Union Church, or go to hillcountryarc.org, and you'll find out everything you need to know there.
Hank, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with us, and I hope we can continue this conversation, and good luck.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having us on the air.